Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone from all over the world. I'm very excited to be here today. I think there's never been a better time to be a cloud entrepreneur in Europe. It reminds me of 10 years ago when I was in the Valley and I saw the birth of so many great cloud companies, and it feels like now we're feeling that momentum in Europe. Last year, we predicted that it would take another 3 years for Europe to produce its first software decacorn. It only took 9 months. Following the steps of great consumer companies like Spotify, Adyen, or Supercell, UiPath crossed this milestone this summer, really showing that Europe has become a hotbed of software innovation. So I'm super happy to be here today to present the Accel Euroscape 2020. In addition of the Euroscape, we're going to unveil something new. We're going to unveil the Accel Euroscape Public Index, which is the index of all the public cloud companies which originated out of Europe and Israel. But just before getting to the Euroscape and the index, we're going to start with a quick market overview. We'll focus on Europe, of course, and how COVID has impacted our ecosystem. I'm Philippe Botteri. I'm a partner with Accel based in London. I've been investing in cloud companies for the past 15 years now, and I'm here with my colleague Varun.
Thank you, Philippe. I'm Varun, and I've been at Accel for the last several years, based in London as well, and focusing on software. It's been a one-of-a-kind year for SaaS and cloud in 2020. And we're excited to walk you through some of our findings in the Euroscape this year. So let's get right to it.
Software has been eating the world for the past 30 years. But I think we're witnessing something different today. I think software is entering a new era, an era I would call the rise of the giants. If you look at this slide, you will see that today we have 8 cloud companies that are north of $100 billion of market cap. And together, they represent an outstanding $2.7 trillion of value. If you compare that to what it was 10 years ago, we had only 3 software companies that were north of $100 billion in market cap. And together, they only represented barely over $500 billion. What a massive jump in the past 10 years. And what's even more exciting is that the new generation is coming. If you look at today, there are 75 cloud companies, public cloud companies, that are north of $1 billion in market cap. This compares to only 8 companies 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, the largest cloud companies were just north of $10 billion. It's totally different from what we're seeing today. And if we zoom back and look at the overall cloud market, today the cloud market represents $100 billion. This is 3 times more than what it was 5 years ago. And if we project the historical growth trends in the next 5 years, we think cloud will overtake on-premise software by 2025, which will be an historical milestone for the cloud ecosystem. And if we look at Europe, Europe is jumping into the race. This summer has been so exciting for the continent as we have witnessed 2 major transactions. The first one was, as I mentioned earlier, UiPath becoming the first cloud unicorn from Europe, which was an amazing milestone. The second one, just one month later, in August, Visma Software was the largest ever software buyout globally. And this is a company out of Sweden, and the value of the transaction was around $12 billion. So at Accel, we've been early believers in the cloud trend, and in the past years, we have invested more than $5 billion in 250 companies. And we have been privileged to work with some category-defining companies such as Atlassian, CrowdStrike, DocuSign, or UiPath. And if we look at Europe, we've been doing a lot in Europe. And what's very exciting today in Europe is that companies can come from everywhere, anywhere on the continent. In the past 5 years, we have invested in more than 16 cities, and we have invested 5 times more than we did in the previous 5 years. And we have been fortunate to back several of the unicorns emerging from the region.
Despite a tumultuous 2020, many lights are green in the SaaS world. When we speak to enterprise buyers, all companies are looking to move to the cloud. Even financial services, a sector we thought 5 years ago was stuck in the past, they're all looking to move into the cloud. So let's have a look at the public markets now. Nearly $1 trillion in market cap has been created in the last 12 months alone. And forward multiples are at all-time highs, 17.1x in September 2020. And when you dial back 12 years, in December 2008, in the height of the financial crisis, multiples were at 1.8x. We've come a long way since then. When we look at the IPO market in 2020, the one word that comes to mind is supersize. We all know about the Snowflake IPO, but the IPOs that happened in 2020, on average, were 2x those in 2019. And public companies have taken advantage of this as well. They've raised twice as much capital through convertible debt as well as secondaries. Now, that's a look at the global market. But Philippe, what about Europe?
Maybe it's time now to unveil the Accel Euroscape public index. So I remember when I was in the Valley in 2008, I was witnessing the birth of the first generation of public cloud company. And this led me to create, while I was Bessemer, the SaaS 13 index, which was the first index of public cloud companies. And it was only 13 companies. And if you look now, 12 years later, it's an index worth $1.7 trillion. And we hope that Europe will follow this path. And today I'm very happy to unveil the Accel Euroscape public index, which is the index of all the public cloud companies which emerge from Europe and Israel. Today this index is composed of 10 companies coming from 7 countries, and together they represent a combined value of $100 billion. And this index has been performing very well. I mean, it has outpaced the NASDAQ by 2x since its inception. And what's even more exciting is that this index is not going to stay very long with 10 companies. I mean, if you look at European cloud unicorns, their numbers have grown more than 50% in the past year. Now we have 25 private cloud companies in Europe with a market cap north of $1 billion. And these companies have been fueled by very large rounds. I mean, if you look back in 2016-17, we look at the top 5 cloud rounds in Europe and Israel. On average, these rounds were $100 million. If you look at the past couple of years, the same top 5 round had an average value of $330 million. And what's very exciting is that if you look at the data in the US, Europe is now very, very close. And from a VC funding standpoint, Europe is also getting much bigger. I mean, if you look at the past year only, just year to date, in September 2020, $9 billion have been raised by European and Israeli cloud companies. This is 30% more than last year over the same period. And looking at the numbers, now we can say that Europe is getting very close to half of the size of the private market in the US, which is an amazing milestone. But even though everything's growing, everything looks great, we live with COVID today, and we have to talk about it. So Varun, tell us how COVID has impacted the cloud ecosystem in Europe and globally.
This is a crisis unlike any we've seen before in 2000 or 2008. A small subset of companies have benefited tremendously. Look at Zoom. It added nearly $150 billion in market cap in the last 9 months, and Shopify, $80 billion. In total, 10 companies have added nearly $500 billion in market value. And if you look at what we discussed earlier, the 1 trillion number, that represents 50% of the total market value added in the SaaS category just from these 10 companies. On the whole, while the outsized successes have been limited to a subset of companies, we've seen that cloud spending has been pretty much at average levels compared to the last few years. In a survey done by KeyBank, and thank you for sharing the data, they found that companies have been slightly more conservative in terms of their growth projections this year, and also in terms of how they're managing their cash. But on the whole, companies have been resilient and have managed this crisis pretty well. One interesting difference we see between US and European companies is that European companies have been slightly more aggressive in terms of their cost cutting. And that's interesting because typically in crises like these, companies tend to react pretty similarly across the board. What do you think, Philippe?
And you're right, Varun. Companies have behaved very differently because this crisis is one of a kind. In 2000 and 2008, the tech ecosystem was very negatively impacted and companies knew what to do. There is only one thing to do. This crisis is very different because on one side, you have unprecedented opportunities that you need to take advantage of. And then on the other side, well, you can't ignore the risk. And if you lean too much over your ski tips, you risk to fall. One example I wanted to give you is, one of my portfolio company in March was very cautious. They revised their budget, they trimmed their costs, and they got into Q2 very cautiously. But then the quarter was actually quite good. And at the beginning of Q3, they decided to hire again, increase their sales capacity, and now they're back to 100% growth rate. So this is the part that is very important in this crisis. You need to take advantage of the opportunities out there. One other thing which I thought was very inspiring is the way many tech companies went out of their way to help fight COVID. I will never forget the call I had with Stan, the founder and CEO of Doctolib, in early March, where basically he told the board that he decided to refocus the company on telemedicine to make sure that the healthcare systems in France and Germany could continue to work during this crisis. But I will let Stan tell you more about his story.
It's the first week of the COVID lockdown in France. We decided to roll out telehealth for all our customers for free during the COVID period.
Thank you, Stan. Another example which I thought was very inspiring was UiPath. The founders started a foundation a couple of years ago, and they refocused the foundation to help fight COVID in Romania. But I will let Alexandra Dines, the chair of the foundation, tell you more about their initiative.
During the lockdown, UiPath Foundation channeled the generosity of UiPath co-founders and staff in a global emergency campaign against COVID-19 that supported the medical system in Romania and the internal migrants in India. More than 2.5 tons of medical equipment were distributed in hospitals across Romania, and we contributed to repairing 57 ventilators for intensive care patients. In addition, we have distributed over 1 ton of food to the families we support across the country, and we have ensured access to online education to 160 children from 5 areas of Romania with tablet devices, accessories, and internet access.
Well, thank you, Alexandra. This is very inspiring, and we really feel proud to have worked with companies like Doctolib and UiPath during this crisis. But the clock is ticking, and now is the time that you've all been waiting for. And I will let Varun unveil the Accel Euroscape 2020.
Thank you, Philippe. 14 billion. That's the capital that this year's winners and champions have raised. That's 6x the capital raised by the 2016 winners. The European cloud ecosystem has come a long way. These companies, over the last 5 years, have created nearly 75,000 jobs and have a combined value of more than $60 billion. Getting to the list, we've made 2 changes this year. We've added a new category of payments and banking infrastructure, and we've excluded unicorns since they qualify for the Champions League. Let's start with the Champions League. 19 category-defining high-growth unicorns. They come from 9 countries and 12 cities and have raised a combined funding of $7 billion. What an impressive list this is. And now for the big unveil. Here is the 2020 Accel Euroscape. As you can see, the data and security categories are booming, and companies targeting the HR and financial services verticals continue to make inroads. And we welcome the addition of a new category, the banking and payments infrastructure category, which we've seen grow with the expansion of the new generation of financial services companies. But what is interesting in particular for us is that these 100 companies come from 34 cities spread out across Europe. Success can truly come from anywhere. Growth has been staggering in these 100 companies. They've doubled their employees in the last 12 months and have created nearly 25,000 jobs in the last few years. Let's also have a look at where the money is going. The marketing and e-commerce vertical has seen a lot of capital being raised in these last few months during COVID. Security is becoming all-pervasive as we continue to see the rise in attacks towards enterprises. And data and analytics, while early, is seeing a lot of activity. As always, and as we've seen in previous years, companies that are customer-centric always win. As this data from G2 shows, the companies featured in the Euroscape are doing far better than their peers in both ratings as well as reviews growth. And now, Philippe, it would be interesting to hear what we think about what's next.
To conclude this presentation, let's look at what's ahead for the cloud ecosystem and what gets us really excited for the future. We think there are 5 trends that will create the champions of tomorrow. The first trend is remote work. So obviously driven by COVID, but the work is really moving into the home, and this is leading to the creation of entirely new software categories. One of them is virtual events, a category created by Hopin. And if you're watching this live, that means you probably already have an account with them. The second trend that we're seeing, also driven by COVID, is the digitization of healthcare. I mean, in a world where people are locked down, you need to contact and connect with all the healthcare practitioners remotely. And this is leading to really an explosion of new communication, collaboration, and telemedicine services. And we think that we're only seeing the beginning of it. The third trend that we're seeing is the rise of the citizen developer, the ability of every employee to own its own robot and to design its own business application. And the interesting thing that we're seeing in this category is the merger of automation and low-code, no-code platform as data and business logics are becoming more and more integrated. The fourth trend that we're seeing right now, and which has fueled the explosion of new financial services, especially across Europe, is digital payments and digital banking infrastructure. This is a new category that we have added to the Euroscape this year, and we think that we are just at the inception and we'll see a lot more of it in the next couple of years. Finally, the last trend that we're seeing is security and privacy. I mean, cyber criminals have been feasting on COVID, and the number of attacks has really increased dramatically in the past few months. This category continues to attract a lot of investments, and we continue to see a lot of innovation, and we expect it to continue in the near future. We hope that these 5 trends will generate the next generation of our Champions League. So overall, if we look back, I mean, it has been an incredible journey for the SaaS ecosystem, and we really feel privileged to have been part of it. I would like to say a big thank you to all the cloud founders who worked hard to make this happen. I mean, as Thomas Edison said, genius is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. And we are all aware of the hard work and resilience of all the cloud founders. And we really enjoy meeting you guys. We want to meet more of you, and we'll be very happy to hear your stories. So do come and talk to us. And as we have a few minutes left, we'll open the floor for Q&A. So feel free to ask any question and we'll pick them up on the screen. Thank you.
Hey, how are you? Philippe and Varun, fantastic talk. A question for you, gentlemen. You know, one of the issues with US companies, actually, I've always felt, is that they've internationalized too late. And if you look at the ones that internationalized super early, like Salesforce or WorkNow, you see that they went to a different level in terms of SaaS. I think one of Europe's advantages is that we internationalize almost by default. We attack a very complex market, sometimes to begin with, sometimes we go to the US. Do you feel that's part of EMEA and Europe's opportunity, the fact that we can internationalize more effectively than our competitors, let's say, in North America?
I totally agree with that. I think this is what I would call the Silicon Valley mindset of European cloud entrepreneur. They really want to be global, and they know that if they want to be global, they have to start going to the US quite quickly for all the enterprise-focused companies. I mean, if you take the example of UiPath, for example, one of the key to their fast growth has been their ability to expand very rapidly at the same time across Europe, Asia, Japan, and the US markets. And so they were able actually to grow all these different regions at the same time, which kind of compounded their growth.
And, you know, if I take UiPath as an example, you know, Daniel comes from Bucharest, not really on the map generally for, you know, startup hubs in Europe. And if I take a look at Bucharest, I think of Mada Sigete, who was originally from there, went and co-founded Branch. I look at even Larry Gadia, who was born there, but although he went to Canada very young. But do you think we'll see the rise with distributed workforces, you know, one of the 5 factors you talked about, do you think we'll see a faster rise or a better opportunity for the cities that are not Berlin, that are not London, that are not Paris? Do you think that the Bucarests of this world have a fantastic opportunity to flourish in the next 3 to 5 years?
Do you want to take that
Absolutely.
question?
So, in fact, if you just, as you saw a few minutes ago, in our Euroscape this year, there were companies out of the 100 companies. These companies came from 34 cities. And so what we're seeing, especially in Europe, and we believe this is a competitive advantage for the European and Israeli ecosystem, is that these companies can come from absolutely anywhere. And while it does mean that it sometimes can be a challenge finding these companies, I think founders especially should be, you know, it's a great sign for them that they don't have to be in a Berlin, they don't have to be in San Francisco in order to make it big. As long as you can find that product market fit and find that right insertion point, you will have the necessary the talent as well as the capital that will get you to becoming a really global company very soon.
And one thing I would like to add on top of this, which I think is very exciting, is that if you look at the US market, you know, it's 70% Silicon Valley, then you have the East Coast with Boston and New York, then you have a bit happening around Austin and Seattle, but you don't have the diversity of hubs that you see in Europe right now. And I think that with the number of hubs we have in Europe and the growth of these hubs, I think it's not going to be too long before actually the European cloud market is going to be the size of the US cloud market. I mean, we thought that today it was half of it. Last year it was 1/3. So, you know, let's give it a couple of years and we'll see.
And if we look at it on a macro level, which of course, whatever percentage Europe has of that, it's impacted by, you know, you mentioned the market's worth more than 100 billion this year. Do you think that's a rapidly changing feast? I mean, when I look at Salesforce.com, they'll do 21 billion this year. If I look at AWS, Salesforce, of course, is super predictable. If I look at AWS, you know, they're probably coming in close to 45 billion. It's a tiny bit of crossover because some of Salesforce is built on AWS, but the vast majority sits on Oracle. But, you know, do you think we're going to find that if this pandemic continues, that's going to be a moving feast, and that number is only going to, we could be looking at a bigger number, 120 by the end of the year? Is that possible?
Well, that's definitely possible, but I also think that this growth is going to continue way beyond the pandemic, and hopefully this pandemic is good, you know, it's going to be over in a few months. But I think the fundamental shifts that we're seeing right now that have been initiated or accelerated by this pandemic are not going to go away.
Absolutely. Après la pluie, le beau temps. So we're looking forward to the end of pandemic as well and flourishing in that time. I know you're from Paris, Philippe. Okay, absolute pleasure. Philippe, and Varun Purandare. I hope I pronounced it correctly.
That's right. That's right.
That's brilliant. And Philippe.
Just to conclude, just a couple of words. I would just like to extend a big congrats to all the winners on the list. I'll mention that all the slides are going to be available. You go to my LinkedIn profile, you will find all the slides and all the information about this Euroscape. And for those who want, we're very happy to continue the discussion into the Accel booth.
Okay, thank you very much. Philippe, Botteri, Varun, Purandare, thanks a million.